Welcome, Ecom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
And there's something about being fact-based. It's easy to trick ourselves into doing just something, and it doesn't really matter. It's not the right thing to do. So once you start measuring and actually have a system for capturing data, you can really leverage and make a difference in those areas.
Welcome, Ecom Logistics Nation. This episode, Nanad and I welcome Hannah Kain, President and CEO of ALOM, a supply chain company she founded back in 1997. ALOM operates out of 19 global locations to support its Fortune 500 customers in the technology, automotive, life science, and regulated industry sectors. Hannah is also a board member of the National Association of Manufacturers, WBENC Pacific, the Women's Business Enterprise National Council, and last but not least, she is board chair of How Women Lead Silicon Valley, and is a member of the Committee of 200 for Executive Women. She's been recognized with numerous awards, including Top 10 Women in Logistics by Global Trade Magazine, and Hannah recently won the SDCE Women Leaders in Supply Chain Award. Congratulations on all that well-deserved recognition, Hannah. We are thrilled to have you joining us today, and welcome to the podcast.
I am thrilled to be here, Dan. Thank you for the gracious introduction, and I really look forward to our discussion today.
Absolutely. And I think if my memory serves right, Hannah's the first women 3PL founder, right? Or a supply chain founder that we have had. I mean, we have had CEOs, right? And, VPs and CSCOs, right? But the first founder, and that too back in the 90s. So I'm really excited to talk about this.
Oh, fantastic. Let's talk about that and why we don't call ourselves a 3PL too.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, good. We'll get right into that. And I think, Hannah, obviously getting to meet you and, doing some research, it's amazing that ALOM is only a few years away from celebrating its 30-year anniversary. In any industry, that's impressive, and would love for you to take us back to those early days and walk us through the catalyst for launching the business and what drove you into the supply chain space.
Well, I think that there are kind of two dimensions, right? There's a dimension of starting a business and listen, I dreamt about starting a business from I was 4 years old, right? And, in the teens when probably all my, especially female classmates were dreaming of Prince Charming. I was scheming on learning more about business and thinking about starting a business. So I was always very entrepreneurial and thinking about that. And it was actually one of the drivers for me immigrating from Denmark, because Denmark was just not a good place to start a business at the time. So in 1990, I bought the one-way ticket and came to the US, and in 94 to Silicon Valley. And there were a number of fascinating things in Silicon Valley that made me start ALOM. But the other aspect is I've always been fascinated at this thing about creating something and physical goods, right? And so the manufacturing part of it, the production part of it has been very fascinating to me. And what happened when I got to Silicon Valley was I saw all this technology, and I started thinking about what happens if we marry that? And today everybody goes, oh, of course, right? But at the time, nobody was thinking about it, right? So in 97, when we started ALOM, I was like, well, how about we create visibility to what we have? So we did probably what's the first customer portal in the industry in 97, right? And people could actually see their inventory, and it was totally fresh. Like every day we would refresh it, right? And today we can laugh, but it people out of the water at the time. So there was that aspect of, can we take technology and really elevate what we are doing when we move or produce Good. The other thing I was thinking was, can we create a supply chain company that is doing well by everybody in the supply chain? So not just customers, right? We all want to be the preferred supplier to our customers, but also to employees. Can we make the employees feel really good about being there? Can we make the vendors feel really good about being part of that ecosystem? Can we create a connection to the community? So that was kind of the other vision, was to do what today is called ESG, right? But at the time, it was people were not thinking so much about incorporating those values into supply chain. And then it was about quality and excellence, right? So I saw a lot of people out there having issues with actually delivering what they promised. And so I was very much about excellence and how can we elevate people such that they really can do what they need to do and give them the tools to succeed. So those were kind of the foundational thoughts as we started ALOM.
Yeah, and something I got to highlight on that front, from my perspective at least, is the three things that you just called out, right? Talking about technology and thinking about it back in the 90s, the unfortunate part that I get to see in the industry over and over again, and you said, we look back and laugh at it, you won't believe the number of companies still today will ask, why do we need a portal to show the inventory position to the customer? Like, can I not just email a report on a daily basis, right? And then they will have the numbers, right? And so as much as technology's evolved, and there have been some really good groundbreaking movements out in the industry, there is a lot that still needs to evolve in this space, right? And so being able to do that in the 90s. Talking about ESG, and I want to dig into this, right? That's something that I have also seen in the industry, where the warehousing distribution specific space, right? There is some focus on the transportation side, but we don't have enough focus industry-wide in general around ESG. If you were to ask a lot of people, leaders in the distribution space, if the client asks for it, let's do it type of thing, versus you going for some of the ISO certification, the greenhouse gas certifications, right? To be able to accommodate that and, staying ahead of the industry. I think that's a really critical goal as well that you have achieved. These things, and also doing it with that Silicon Valley mindset, because what we have seen is, yes, since I would say 2010 plus, right? That time frame, you have seen a lot of focus in the supply chain space. But not a lot of companies had that much technological innovation in the supply chain space. And I guess it's that Silicon Valley ethos that comes into play for you, right? And quality. You mentioned quality, so I just want to bring that up. A lot of people focus on quality from the perspective of, quality standards to healthcare, because the client is forcing you to go there, rather than adopting quality standards where you would say, hey, it doesn't matter if the product that I carry inside the warehouse is a $5 product, that's inside the truck is a $10 product, I'm still going to achieve a Six Sigma inventory accuracy, right? That level of rigor is still not existent. And I know there is a cost associated to that rigor that comes along with it as well, right? So
I don't know about that thing with the cost. I always said that quality is free, right? Because it's better to do things right the first time than having to do them over. And what we have done is incorporated quality as one of the core elements in our culture. And so it's part of what we are and how we do things, right? And we think about how do we make this right the first time, and we set our systems up to support that. So that's part of the vision. So I always believe that not only is quality free, it's actually probably the only way to run a profitable company in the industry.
Makes sense.
So a couple of things that I want to draw on before. I think Ninad just did an amazing job framing where we're going to go in this conversation. But I do want to go back to one other thing that you mentioned, is why you don't call yourself a 3PL. So what's the origin behind that, and what's the strategy there?
Yeah, so we are really a supply chain company. So we take over parts of our customer supply chain and do everything from planning for excellent execution. With based on our values, we also then do procurement, production. So we have in-house production facilities, right? So we are really a light contract manufacturer. And then we do distribution. So we are very customized to our customers when they come in. We really, 80 to 90% of what our customers ask us to do, we already do. But 10 to 20% we invent for that customer. And so we really understand the customer, and it's a very intimate process over to the customer. So when you say 3PL, we are thinking warehouses that take product in and then they do distribution, right? We do a lot more out of all our facilities. And we also have a different level of customer intimacy where we are doing things like product configuration and tracking and visibility of a number of different issues. We do media duplication. We do a lot of different other services in-house. So we have a lot of services that a normal 3PL would not have.
So was that the original strategy, or was it kind of the voice of customer that drove you into all these other different segments that you offer?
Oh, a little bit of each, right? We're customer driven, so customer comes and says, hey, can you do this or that? We will certainly think about that and see if we can incorporate it. And that's really how we, over the years, elevated the company to do a number of different activities. But we always were very focused on doing whatever the customer needed, which encompassed a lot of different functions in the supply chain. So yeah, we started out doing quite a bit of what we're doing now, but we added a lot of services, and of course we changed a lot. Right? Hey, the first year we were in business, 57% of our revenue came from floppy disk duplication. And some of your listeners may not know what a floppy disk is,
True.
Right?
So, I know my kids wouldn't know what that is. Yeah.
So yeah, my one of my nephews said, "Hey," I showed him a floppy disk. He said, "Oh, that looks like the save button." I'm like, "Yeah." So I think. We've always been very focused on being the one-stop partner, right? And so, of course, at some point of time, you've got to say, okay, this is too much out of scope. But we've actually been able to meet our customers' requirements over time. So we lean towards saying yes.
So, Hannah, like going back to the 90s, right? Like I started off with the comment about like the first like women founder of a supply chain company, joining the podcast. How was it in the 90s? Like, were the struggles real? Because there is a perception, and I've had to say, I've been in the industry since about 2005-06 time frame at this point as well. And the industry has definitely evolved quite a lot over just that duration that I'm talking about right now. And you were there way before me, but it wasn't, you weren't trying to break into a company. You were trying to build a company, and you were sitting in these boardrooms, these meeting rooms that looked very different back in the 90s. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it was hard because there was certainly more barriers for women back then. There's still barriers for women, but I think back then was challenging, and lots of stories about people calling and asking for Mr. ALOM. I think one of my favorite stories was I wanted to lease some space. Well, space is a big deal when you're starting up, right? So I'm meeting directly with the landlord, and the landlord keeps going, "Oh, but what does your husband think about this?" business. Well, my husband was not involved in the business, right? So finally, after a couple of go-arounds, I was like, I'm not going to be able to make a deal here. Right? That relationship, we just couldn't build that relationship. And I went and started working with another landlord, and in the meantime, I sent them at least $20 or $30 million worth of business that the other guy lost out on, right? So, it's not, that entire thing can be pretty dysfunctional. The other thing that happened was so I'm not easily discouraged, right? So we did 34 bank presentations before we found a bank we could bank with. So I had a down pat by then. So those were kind of the areas where I saw most of the barriers. But it is what it is. You try to succeed in the environment you are in, and there were also a lot of good things happening, right? All the people who believed in what we could do and believed in we could build this company and who joined my team, right? Which at the time you had to think about that you want to work for a female CEO, right? Yeah. That was a real decision back then. And so lots of good stuff also. So that one should never forget that.
Yeah. And maybe, and this is a hypothesis, maybe being in Silicon Valley potentially helps versus some of the hubs of like where logistics and supply chain kind of plays out, right? Like Silicon Valley is not the natural hub, and it's starting to evolve now just because of the type of companies that are there. But in the 90s, I'm guessing that kind of does help with at least the environment around you is more supportive than if you, and I don't want to call out any specific cities on the podcast, but there are cities in the Midwest where it would have been a different scenario altogether.
Okay. Yeah, I think there might be something to that, but there was also this strong outsourcing trend among technology companies. And so they had a number of technology companies had actively decided that they were going to outsource, and that was their strategy. And they didn't want to build their production sites and distribution sites. They wanted to outsource. So that kind of fueled the industry here in California as well. So we're still I'm here in California right now. So or on a plane a lot of times, right, out to visit customers and sites. But we're still headquartered in California.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. That's awesome, Hannah. All right, so now we're going to jump into ESG and the trends that are going on there. And for those that aren't familiar, ESG is environmental, social, and governance, and the reporting that comes out of it and the need. And Hannah, it feels like, based off of the earlier conversation, that you've actually embedded some of this into the company's DNA, and it's just part of your people and the organization. But it is a hot topic today, and there is a lot of complexity, specifically in the world of supply chain as it relates to ESG reporting. So what has been your approach to addressing that ESG complexity, and just curious how you go about collaborating with your clients to work through it?
Okay, well, there was a lot of meat on that question. We are committed to sustainability, right? And that's what a lot of people are talking a lot about right now. But there's also the social aspect, right? So that's about how can we help the communities we're in. So we are generally sourcing really close to our facilities, which helps the community we are in, and it also helps the environment. Right? So there's a lot of things you can do just by, and frankly, also the agility and resilience, right? You don't have to get everything from the other side of the world. The other thing with social is, of course, things like, are people being treated right in the supply chain? And now you were talking about, how you're dealing with the reporting. Well, in Germany, with the Supply Chain Act they have there, if you cannot prove that you don't use slave labor in the supply chain, then you can be fined 4% of your worldwide revenue. So if you deal with some of the U.S. corporations, let's call it Amazon, Apple, Ford, GM, 4% of the annual revenue, that's real money. And so I think we all overlook the social aspect at our peril. We need to make sure that our supply chains are solid. So it's both the penalties, the regulatory aspect coming in, but it's also, I think, a reputational risk and frankly, for me, an emotional risk. Right? I don't want anybody in our supply chain to be put their lives at risk or work in an environment where they don't work out of their own volition. So there's a lot of meaty issues in this, right? So when it comes to the environment, we went from people saying, oh, what is all this thing with the environment? Then we went to, okay, everybody ought to do something, right? Not define what something is, exactly. Right? And then now we are a little bit more getting into the phase where everybody's saying, okay, let's measure it, right? And I think that is what you really need to do, right? I'm always making fun of my husband, saying, my husband is making fun of me, to be honest, because when it's Christmas, I say, okay, if the cookie is broken, it's got no calories, right? And it's not necessarily fact-based, right? And there's something about being fact-based, right? It's easy to trick ourselves into doing just something, and it doesn't really matter. It's not the right thing to do. So once you start measuring and actually have a system for capturing data, you can really leverage and make a difference in those areas. So that's very much what we are about. We set a baseline, and then we have a path to improve. So there's improvement we can do in our own facilities and with our carriers and with our suppliers and so forth. Then there's what we can do with our customers. Right? So our customers all have physical goods. When you have physical goods, 95% of your emissions thereabouts come from the supply chain, and only 5% from your headquarters of what's going on internally. So that really doesn't matter, to be honest, right? It's the supply chain that matters. So we sit down with our customers as part of our QBR process. We sit down, quarterly business review process. We sit down with them and talk about their impact on the environment and how we can help drive that down. So that's a standard item on our agenda with our customers in a collaborative manner. So, we're putting it up on the agenda, and I think that's where it should stay.
So Hannah, would you say, like, as any company that wants to follow good ESG, standards, that they kind of make similar to quality or other things that they do, where they make it part of their core, regardless of if the customer is asking or not, to be able to capture the data and then present it and say, hey, here's an opportunity area for you for what we know about your supply chain. Of course, you are, you don't get the full visibility, but the part of visibility that you do have, presenting even before you are being asked.
Exactly. I think it's key to get it into every decision being made, and also to create that visibility over to customers. And listen, if you go in and see people's reviews online of different products, etc., many of the complaints people have is it came in too big packages. It doesn't look sustainable. Different ways. Why was it sent via Kentucky? Whatever. Right? I mean, people look at it. Right, so it's really an end-user movement, and we shouldn't underestimate that.
Yeah, and so just to dive one level deeper on that, because transportation has such a huge impact, right? Like if you look at it from a supply chain standpoint, that's where a lot of the environmental impacts kind of come from. In my search for the sustainable carrier, I don't find too much that is out there. Is that me not finding the right companies, or like are the partners out there that people can rely on to be able to say, hey, I can provide you, the true carbon footprint or whatever measurement you are trying to capture, but the carriers are able to support that information back to you? Like, what's your strategy? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the strategy needs to be around how can we transport things around the least. Right, there's how do we transport it more sustainably, but there's how do we minimize how much we're moving things around, right? So again, you look at the finished goods. Typically, the finished goods has a lot of air in the boxes and takes up more space, etc. So can you transport it to closer to a destination in a more raw form, doing what we call postponement, right? Last minute, making it into the finished goods that the customer needs. Then you can maybe also, as part of that, you can have less inventory. Less inventory generally means less scrap. Right.
Yep.
So, we all know in the industry the problem that we don't know where the demand is. We don't know how big the demand is and where to position inventory. So the less inventory you can have and still fulfill,
Yep.
the less waste you have, right? So this is not just about finding a carrier that's more sustainable or has less issues of different types. It's also about thinking about how you can make your supply chain more responsible in different ways. How can you transport things less? How can you make whatever you transport smaller and easier to deal with? How can you eliminate waste in your inventory positioning? How can you produce just in time, whether it's via postponement or via 3D print strategies or digital print strategies or things of that nature? Yep. So it's more of a big picture thing, I think, than just looking at the carrier's responsibility. But certainly we do look at carrier's responsibility. I mean, you may have seen that I recently posted about us getting a truck in where that clearly had been used for human trafficking. You could just see that was what had happened, and we react really strongly to things like that. I mean, no doubt about it. And I only found out a couple of days later because my staff just was all over it. So that makes me really proud when they just take action immediately.
Wow. Now that's no, I have not read that post, but I am going to read that post because that sounds out of all the stories I've had of like trucks being used for different things, this is one that's definitely the one that gives you shock to the system. So, and I'm glad you guys kind of like figured it out and did something about it. Wow. And you know what? That actually brings me to like the social aspect of the ESG side of things, right? So you brought up the example of like, let's make sure, you don't use slaves in actually manufacturing something. But just within the North American system, right? Like you heard all the stories from, as an example, Amazon. You're getting paid minimum wage, right? Like in a lot of the supply chain activities that actually occur, I've always been vocal about the fact that, automation is required because a lot of these jobs people don't want to do because, we have turned it into a race to the bottom from a cost management perspective. Some of the activities that occur in manufacturing or in warehousing, it's kind of become something that you also have a high attrition type environment. But the fact of the matter is, right, we still need a lot of human labor in actually doing this work, and labor management and quality standards, etc., require a lot of rigor. How do we balance that, right? Like in doing that versus the profitability versus, being good social citizens, right? Not just the partners, but the employees that are working under you, and be it a badged employee or a contracted temp worker, doesn't really matter. It's at the end of the day, human being. So I'm guessing a lot of people could learn a lot of things from you for you to be able to achieve these standards.
So I think it's about doing right by people and starting from that standpoint. And people, I hear a lot of discussion about retention, employee retention. And that's a real key thing, because if you look at the demographics, especially in the US, it doesn't work for us, right? You do the math and it doesn't look good in terms of hiring people 5, 10, 20 years from now. Right? So you need to do something with automation, but you also individually need to do something on the retention side. But for me, retention is not really the goal. For me, engagement is the goal. Right? So if you look at engagement in the US workforce, about 37% of the workforce is engaged in what they do. 37%. Now, that's a really scary number, because 2/3 of everybody going to work or working from home or whatever they're doing are not engaged in their work.
Yeah.
That's really a scary, scary number. And if you run a company or a department and you're not thinking about that, you're really missing the boat, right? Oh, yeah. So for us, it's very much about engagement, and that starts with treating people right from the beginning. It starts with, of course, supplying a great work environment and very inclusive work environment. It also includes having benefits, of course, fair compensation, and then it includes having everybody be part of their job. It's not just something you show up, but it's got a purpose to it, right? And so that's part of what we're working on all the time. Are there days where it's more fun to work at ALOM than not? Yeah, probably, right? but in the end, it's important to me that everybody feels part of the company and part of building something. And I think that's a key thing for everybody who is in business, not just in supply chain, to think about is that employee engagement. And of course, with engagement comes the retention. And that brings me to the other part of your question, which is, but isn't it more expensive to have people then? And, lots of studies show that the big problem, the big cost, especially on senior levels, is turnover. Right? You have turnover. One thing is a line worker, not good, but you go to manager level. I was just even yesterday evening speaking with somebody who says it takes us a year to onboard somebody at mid-level, right, in supply chain. Because we have complex stuff going on, a lot of processes and a lot of systems, and so a year to onboard somebody. So that's another thing we have worked on is, and I had an epiphany some years back around this entire thing with onboarding. How can we make onboarding faster? And so I went, can we go from 1 or 2 years for people to understand everything related to their job to 1 week? And what would that take? And so we did. I don't think we are 1 week, but we are pretty darn good at getting people effective from the beginning. So there are different ways of driving costs down in a system other than negotiating the employee's salary down.
Exactly.
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
I'm curious, Hannah. Well, first of all, we can't have a podcast, it feels like, anymore without talking about AI. And I'm wondering if you have either in use or are contemplating AI for some of what we just talked about. So when you talked about sustainability and you talked about, inventory forecasting, or, maybe it's raw material forecasting for some of the contract manufacturing that you do. When it comes to the engagement with employees or engagement with clients, are you seeing what's your take? Because I think there's people who are super excited about it on one side of the fence, and there's others that think it's kind of lip service and it's not quite where everyone thinks it is. So would just love your perspective on are there use cases where you're applying AI in your business today? And, are there any that you're considering down the road?
Oh, yeah. I'm really super bullish on AI, but not now. right?
Okay.
So we do use AI. I mean, obviously, editing and things like that, like everybody else. We have some AI applications with item recognition. So what we're seeing right now is AI is really good when you have a human behind it who looks at things, right? So in supply chain, none of us like 95% accuracy or 98% accuracy. That doesn't do anything for us, right?
Yeah.
And especially for us who are in the medical industry, right? You cannot use that for anything. You need to go up and touch 100%, right? And so where AI can be useful is things like cycle counting, where another person then looks at any discrepancies, right? Those type of applications we're seeing now, we are rolling them out. We're using AI in a couple of different places in the company. But when I look at the future, and I'm glad we get to talk about the future now, we went down memory lane to the 90s, right? So let's talk about the future also. I think AI has a lot of different applications in supply chain. So first of all, we are sitting with a lot of unstructured data that we cannot really do anything with. And when I say unstructured, during the pandemic, right, one of the big problems we had during the pandemic supply chain crisis was we had systems that were very good at dealing with structured data, right? But we had a lot of unstructured data. So when the structured data was, we have an item and the lead time is 17 days. That's a structured data. Well, what happened during the pandemic was all of a sudden it was, it's not 17 days, it's maybe 4 weeks, it's maybe 2 years, right? Kind of. And our systems were not set up to deal with that type of ambiguity, right? And now I use that as an example. There are lots of more pieces of unstructured data out there. So if we can normalize it, if you think about how much time do we all spend in supply chain on normalizing data, and there's things like unit of measure, right? Think about if we can do that systematically. Now maybe we can even get our systems to talk to each other. We get our system in, we get the SAP and we transfer things, or we get a high job in, and all of a sudden it connects, right? Because it knows how to connect those type of things. And it knows how things, they can see how things are set up and how it should be transferred, and those type of normalization. But the big thing out there with AI is, of course, demand forecasting. And, if supply chain professionals had a magic wand and they had one wish, right? It would be to know where the demand was. Where should I position my inventory, and which inventory, and how much? Right? That's a holy grail, right? And I think that's way out in the future, but I think we have a possibility of doing some of that with AI, especially on consumer goods.
Yeah.
So I feel that there's fantastic opportunities out there. I think everybody should play with AI, use the productivity gains you can get from AI. I don't think that it's ready for prime time in supply chain.
Yeah. And you know what, this is an interesting conversation because two things. One, you mentioned, it's a little far out when it comes to some of that critical demand forecasting type capabilities. And that's, it goes down to the point like, so we used to work for FedEx, both Dan and I. And so we always used to say, we can predict where the box is going to go. But what we don't know is what's going to be in the box, right? Like, so that is something that we are blind to as a carrier. But there are companies now, right? Like think about the likes of Googles and Amazons that actually know where the true demand signals exist, right? And have the data necessary to be able to do that. And so one of the conversations we had was with a supply chain leader in Google, right? Where Google's ability to be able to predict some of that and their willingness to start sharing that level of data from a demand forecasting perspective. I think there are technological innovations that are just around the corner that are actually going to help us tremendously. When some of these companies take that social responsibility to say, hey, this is for the good of the society, to be able to expose some of that data. Of course, data is what makes these companies data rich, right? But if that starts to happen, I think we are going to start seeing that change in the industry. So, and
I agree, and it's going to be a new revenue stream for them, right?
Absolutely.
There are people out there, there are companies out there that already do some of this. They go in and measure sentiments on social media, and they know that, now there's a Barbie movie out, and everybody wants things in pink, right? And those type of things, right? We're starting. As I said, it's early days. I think it will be difficult to do in B2B, but B2C, I think we have some promise of seeing it in our lifetimes.
I completely agree, 110%.
Hannah, before we let you go, we've talked a lot about your past and your journey in the present day, but I know you got very excited about talking about the future. So are there do you have maybe 2, 3, 4 trends, or what are you most excited about? We're sitting here January 2024. What are you most excited about that's around the horizon for us?
So I think a lot of the issues we're having now will be solved by technology, and so I'm a big technology believer. I also think that there's huge challenges ahead the next years because technology is lacking right now in solving what the supply chain problems we are having, the challenges. If you look at geopolitics, it's a big worry for everybody. Right now, the Houthis have essentially shut down the Suez Canal, right? That's impacting freight all over the globe. We've got Panama Canal without water, and that's just the canals, right? So then we've got the different tariffs and conflicts and barriers to trade. And I think that right now people are just trying to deal with this in the supply chain industry as well as we can. But technology will eventually help, but the next couple of years is going to be really challenging. And then the other thing that I see is regulations, right? And especially for somebody who does international business, you've got a plethora of regulations in different areas. In the US, we have states going in and regulating things they've never regulated before, on top of federal regulations and local regulations. So you get a very challenging regulatory environment, and it puts a big burden on industry as such, but especially on supply chain organizations. And again, I'm a technology believer. I believe that eventually technology will be helping us solve some of this, but the next couple of years are just going to be very challenging for supply chain professionals. And I'm always concerned that we need, our policy is to be compliant and to follow regulations, but it's very, very challenging. So and our customers are seeing that as well. So I think those are two big challenges that we are going to have to work through over the next couple of years. And, I was born in Odense, Denmark, with the town of the fairy tale author Hans Christian Andersen, and he had a thing in one of his fairy tales. He said, things will be so much worse and you've got to go through a lot before it gets better. And I think that's kind of describes what I see for supply chain the next couple of years. So none of us are going to run out of things to do the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Based on that, yeah, we all got jobs.
Right. Amazing, Hannah. And Hannah, it was an absolute pleasure having you join us today, and thank you for such a wonderful conversation. As we wrap up here, I'd love to give you the opportunity to share with the audience where they could go to follow you on social media. You mentioned some posts that you're doing, so if that's on LinkedIn or wherever that might be, if you could share that with the audience and where they could go to learn more about ALOM.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's been a great pleasure to be here and talk about one of my favorite topics. Right? You can go to ALOM's website, alom.com, so it couldn't be easier than that, right? And we've got podcasts on there, and we've got blog on there, and of course, general information. And a lot of it you can also see either at ALOM's LinkedIn site, or you can go to my personal LinkedIn site, which is Hannah Kain. So we are fairly easy to find on the web, I think. So we like to talk about what's going on and be part of leading the supply chain effort. That's actually one of our goals, is to be part of the supply chain ecosystem and help for the supply chain in general.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Hannah.
Well, it was my pleasure to be here.
Hi, I'm Ninad Acharya, CEO and co-founder of Fulfillment IQ, and I'm here with
Dan Call, CRO and partner at Fulfillment IQ. We're the team behind the Ecom Logistics podcast. Our mission is to provide you with genuine insights from our work alongside logistics leaders to help you improve your supply chain.
In the Ecom Logistics podcast, we share the knowledge and the insights we've gained from working alongside amazing brands, retailers, 3PLs, and VCs, so you can make the most out of your supply chain journey.
If you like what you're hearing, we'd truly appreciate your support with a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting channel. Your feedback not only keeps us going, but also helps others find the podcast. If you think Fulfillment IQ can assist you, or if you have an idea related to logistics, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always up for a chat and ready to explore new possibilities together.
Stay tuned to the Ecom Logistics podcast on your favorite podcast platform for fresh and practical insights into e-commerce and logistics. Until next time, let's keep making a difference in logistics together.